Hello, and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today you're listening to episode 99 with Joe Anderson, DP of Mrs. Davis. Enjoy.
Have you been watching anything cool recently?
I just last night watched the first 2 episodes of Documentary Now.
Oh, really? Okay.
From season 4, where they do Werner Herzog, but he's like in the Tibetan mountains doing a comedy pilot for CBS, a multi-camera pilot, and I have not laughed like that in a very long time. Like, it's just, they're so good with their inside jokes. They know what they're spoofing so well. The DP and co-director Alex Buono, he started off doing SNL digital shorts.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of like, and this is like a really great kind of like step from doing those, which are all about parodies, to doing like really good production value. They really mimic the format of the cameras they use in the different documentaries they're spoofing. It's really, really fun. And if no one outside of the movie business even gets the jokes, that's fine. I do. It's amazing.
I think I've only seen one Werner Herzog documentary, which was the one about the volcanoes, like the people who lived under the volcanoes. And other than that, I think I've seen him act in shit.
Yeah, he did a weird, I remember seeing him acting. Does he act in, I guess he just directed Bad Lieutenant 2.
Oh, no.
A very strange, I guess, detour for him. But, everyone's got to pay the bills. So good for him.
Yeah, that's an interesting, his career's nowhere near over, but I was going to say that's a very interesting career trajectory for that man, to be like super into docs and then just go off and do everything else. Like,
yeah, and I was looking him up on IMDb, and he's got tons of self credits. He appeared in things. He's hundreds in Germany in the 70s. So he's been, I didn't realize he's been a fixture for half a century now. Yeah, interesting man.
Yeah, easy to satirize. A lot of material there. Did you? Normally I'll try to do extra looking up, but I was on a gig all day the past 2 days, so I didn't have as much time. But wasn't able to look up, like, how did you get involved in film to begin with? Not necessarily like, I was a kid and I liked film, but like what kind of broke you into the industry after you, or how'd you make your way towards quote unquote proper filmmaking?
Yes, I do have one of those origin stories. I think a lot of people did find movies as a kid. There's certain movies that kind of like got me excited. But I did have the good fortune, fast forwarding, I did have a good fortune of going to a nice film school, and I met at NYU. I met a bunch of amazing filmmakers there, even though we were just 20-year-olds who didn't know how we were going to do it. But, I've been really fortunate just to be in this kind of really cool circle of people like Sean Durkin, Antonio Campos, Janixa Bravo. They're all directors who are doing big fancy stuff. There was also a good couple of years for DPs when I was there. Adam Newport Berra, Jody Lipes were all from kind of my year or two. And I was kind of intimidated by film sets, to be honest. It's not necessarily an environment that is a warm, welcoming environment on every project. And the couple little moments I'd had working on even kind of bigger budget student films that had hired some professionals, I was quite discouraged. So I said, okay, great. Post-production is the place for me. I'm going to learn Avid. I'm going to learn Final Cut. I'm going to do all this. And I did all those things, and I love editing, and I think it actually I have a little bit of a background in editing. I think that does give me some unique qualities as a cinematographer.
I've said it 100 times that being an editor makes you a better DP, because you just know which shots to avoid, or like what time you can actually, where your time should be spent.
Yeah, totally.
If necessary.
And we can go into that too. Like, for example, a lot of directors I've worked with nowadays don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the wide shots. The wide shots, of course, look great. They show off the production value, but they literally will pop back to those for a moment and then back into, coverage. And a lot of times now, directors just want to shoot that at the very end. Use the actor's energy is good right at the beginning. Let's shoot their medium shots and close-ups. And then once we got it in the bag, pull back, shoot a take or two of the wide shot and get going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing too is, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead. I get, feel free to just steamroll me, because I tend to just, chase fireworks. But what I was going to say was that nope, already lost it. All right, go ahead.
Okay. I'm in editing, and it's fun. But it's kind of lonely. And though you have a lot of power and a lot of creativity, there's just something about the gang of rascals that are running around film sets that I just couldn't get away from. And I'd kind of dabbled in every kind of department in film school. And I'd taken a cinematography class. And I didn't feel like I knew everything that a DP is supposed to know in order to be a DP. There's lots of responsibility. There were kids back then talking about, I like a thicker negative. I like to overexpose by a third of a stop, or underexpose. And it's just like, I didn't know what that meant then. And it was just intimidating. And I took a cinematography class, and the teacher was a bit cynical of lots of things. He kind of said, it's great that this school is focused on directors, but there's 250 kids per class. Not everyone's going to get a job as a director. Wouldn't it be interesting if you could learn another trade as part of the business as you work towards figuring out what you're best at, what you love doing? And he literally said, how come there's not enough emphasis on learn how to load a camera?
Right.
And these were back in the days right before the Red One was even a thing. And lots of student films were still being shot on 35 millimeter, even 16 millimeter. And I learned how to load up mags. And so right outside of school, I had a skill that I could kind of promote for myself. And I went on places like Mandy and Craigslist and Facebook, and just looking for just experience. Though I wasn't making a living for a bit. It took about a year of kind of hustling and working on student films for sometimes, $80 a day, anything that I could,
Right.
do. But it kind of made an impression on cinematographers. They would bring me on stuff that's maybe slightly more fancy than a student film eventually. And I became a focus puller. So I came up quite formally through camera department.
Nice.
And it gave me a nice kind of introduction to all the different aspects of the business, in terms of, I worked on music videos, commercials, movies, and you name it, everything except exercise videos and porn. I think I did a little bit. And I worked like that for a number of years. Worked for primarily Jody Leip, who I'd gone to school with. I also got the nice opportunity to work a bit with Bradford Young.
Oh, nice.
Right before he kind of exploded. In fact, the last movie I ever worked on as a focus puller was Ain't Them Body Saints, which that just kind of came out in this year at Sundance, where he exploded and became this famous guy. And, obviously he's, rocketed to cinematography superstardom. But that that was kind of a nice way to kind of go out as a cinematographer or as a focus puller. It was that was my last movie.
Yeah. There's that brings me to a handful of questions, but the first one I thought of was, did you experience a lot of luck with Mandy?
I would not answer in the affirmative, but and granted, this was 18 years ago at this point, so I imagine there's been some evolution potentially.
No. I keep trying to cancel that thing and I forget.
Right.
Been handing them money for no reason.
I think it's just tough when you're starting out. Anything you can do to kind of get your name out there, I think is a good thing to do. I think, even if I do think I got a couple, probably a couple projects from Mandy back in the day, but what it did also try to kind of force me to do is I had to kind of come up with a bio or a resume and a photo. And so it did a little bit kind of at least guide me in that regard to try to kind of create, a name for myself in that way. Yeah.
When I was still, as you said, like just hustling for jobs, I got, I think one thing out of Mandy. This was a few years ago, and they were like, it's for a true crime show or something. I was like, all right. And they're like, we need you to just film. It needs to look kind of crappy, so just use your cell phone. It's fine. And it just needs to be like you driving your, like mounted to the dashboard. And I was like, okay, like looking outwards. Mm-hmm. Great. And then so they're like, all right, we'll use you. That sounds good. Also, you need to dress in all black with a balaclava, have a backpack on forward on your chest, and walk into this very specific bank. And I was like, I am not fucking doing that for like $200.
Yeah, I've not been quite in that situation, but you really do. When you're just starting, just kind of anything, I would take anything. I remember just not knowing where we were shooting. I would just get in the van and, we're in Staten Island. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's a fascinating world. Lots of creative people. It is a lot like a circus in that regard. There's all this stuff going on. It's really fun. What I've learned over the years that there's kind of a place for everybody. Obviously, we're all kind of trying to climb the ladder and, do fancier stuff and have more people see what we do. But that's something I think we all kind of have in common. We're all in this like circus troupe.
Yeah. Well, and the thing nowadays I've found, and you can tell me if you agree, is that like it's perfect. I think a lot of people when they're coming up, once they hit like a certain budget or certain style, they're like, all right, I can never go back. And I found that like a lot of times, as we were saying with Werner Herzog, like you kind of moonlight doing other stuff to pay the bills. And a lot of times on those smaller, dumber sets, let's say, you end up meeting people who are working way below their pay grade, who can bring you higher up if you're, handy and helpful.
Yeah, that's a real kind of concern for myself too. It's like I started in indie world movies, even doing, I worked on Tiny Furniture, which was like a $30,000 film shot in the director's house. Mm. I've had some of my favorite movie making experiences have been on small things in some crazy county where there's no cell reception. And it's obviously very, exciting to be able to work on bigger stuff and have a bigger audience and have more toys. But yeah, I don't want to get myself into kind of a golden handcuff situation where I can't do it if the crew isn't this big, or I can't use these kind of lights. And we'll see. I have lots of friends who are in the same predicament, or production designers, costume designers. It's kind of a common thing, but ultimately it's a nice problem to have of all the problems.
Yeah. So you're saying like people won't call you because they're like, oh, he's too expensive now.
I do
like that.
Totally. A lot of there's a writer's strike right now, so there's no kind of union writing projects are springing up at the moment. I used to make a living doing non-union commercials and things like that, and yeah, I think those calls are no longer coming my way.
Yeah, well, and also I'll say I live right next to a rental house over here that I'm good friends with, and they said and well, when I talked to him like last month, that they haven't really been getting orders in since November. It just seems like at this moment, which, you know, this podcast tends to be evergreen, but maybe not this exact conversation. But yeah, it just seems to be kind of dead overall since late last year.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's some big things happening. And I think it's more than just the writer's strike. I think we're still very much in the early days of these streaming platforms, kind of that business model. Yeah. And up until recently, it was all about growing subscribers and throwing as much money and getting as many shows going. And though that was really nice, lots of people had jobs, there was lots of stuff being made. We're in a little bit of a correction era now, and it's kind of like, okay, wait, how do we actually make a profit? So I think, I can't obviously speak, I don't know what's going on inside the studios, but like there's some real kind of back to the whiteboard kind of conversations happening. I hope it's a positive thing.
Yeah, I just saw, like, right before we started talking, I saw like a tweet that someone was like, well, the issue from their perspective seems to be that the studios went from selling films to selling subscriptions.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that changes their focus, you know, on, not to say that things that are coming out aren't quality. Fucking Mrs. Davis, excellent film, television show, but the priorities seem to be shifted, you know.
Yeah.
They're not selling subscriptions with the films. They're just selling subscriptions.
Right. No, and it's, you know, there was an era where if a movie studio had a big movie come out and fail, that suddenly threw into disarray their, you know, the next year's movies. Maybe they took fewer chances because this movie failed and they need to kind of get some safe bet movies out into theaters. There's some bad parts of that kind of business model too. So we'll see what happens.
The one that I have been screaming about for years, which seems to be more coming to a head as the years progresses. Back in film school, I had a pretty vicious punk rock streak my whole life, and so in college, when they were like, when they taught us about the Paramount Accords, I was like, yeah, fuck that system. And then, like, as I've gotten older, I'm like, wait, it's happening again. And then I think a few years ago, the Supreme Court was like, actually, those don't matter anymore. Vertical integration isn't a thing. It's fine. And it's infuriating.
Yeah, it's curious. I've never heard anyone talk about that in terms of, is that going to come back? The idea of you can't make something and put it out on your own platform. I don't think that'll make it to the Supreme Court if that trial happens. No. I think those days are behind us. But yeah, it's a new world, and, you know, I just hope we get to keep making the stuff that we love.
There's been a handful of, I suppose, online conversations about it, but I am optimistic about, you know, even with people, well, now this is very topical, but like even people freaking out about AI and stuff like that. I'm like, it's like music, man. Like a lot of really like engineered pop music, let's say. I love pop music just like anyone else, but it can feel very sterile, and everyone always goes like, whether or not that's, you know, whoever, Taylor Swift is their favorite musician, they always go back to like, oh, this one album felt a lot better, and it's when it was human, you know, like what's something I used to think, like the idea of perfection is boring. Like, it doesn't excite the human soul when everything is absolutely laser perfect and level and everything. When there's a little bit of, you know, wabi-sabi to it, that's when people get excited. And I don't think you can code in that imperfection, because it goes off feeling. And feeling is inherently human. You can't teach a computer, or you can't engineer feeling, you know. At least that's my thought.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of one of the big topics of 2023, as well as the TV show that I shot. It is, it's, you know, the uncanny valley is not the same as, you know, the kind of charming human imperfection that you're talking about. And I think, there's some aspects of this AI large language model generative imagery stuff that's happening that is it kind of makes you feel a little small sometimes, and not know what what are my values in all of this, and how will the world value what I do. But I'm ultimately very kind of optimistic about it, kind of in the exact ways that you said, where maybe as more and more computer generated stuff happens, there's going to be more value in kind of an excellently, very insightful kind of human made thing. And in my kind of most dearest projects that I've shot, that's a little bit been kind of a through line well before even this kind of very recent technology has come out and has a name. There's this idea too that when I think a lot of creatives are under pressure to kind of deliver something that does feel very perfect. As photographers, we see what's popular, we see what gets accolades, and we kind of feel like we have to kind of do the same thing. But at the same time, you are a little bit sacrificing your own kind of creative spirit in copying something else. So, though it's awesome to be influenced and learn from what other people are doing, I think, you can't, I wouldn't want to hire a plumber they didn't know anything about plumbing. I want to work with people that know the craft. But I think it is those kind of human kind of DNA that you can kind of put into stuff that isn't computer made. I can go into lots of more details on this too, but I really do value not shooting in a way that feels sterile. I even kind of only try to use remote heads only when necessary, because I think there is a little bit, in addition to a little bit of just a little delayed reaction, there's also just this like computerized thing to it where I like a little bit of breathing and you can feel the camera, you can feel the filmmakers, what's happening in front of the camera. It is a magic trick. There's all these like things coming together to make it all work, but it did happen. It is something that was recorded in front of a camera. And I do think, the audience subconsciously feels that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, my directing teacher back in college was like, filmmaking is making the audience feel the way you want them to feel when you want them to feel it. And that engineered perfection doesn't make you feel anything beyond it's the empty calories of it all. The other thing I was thinking of was like, in terms of like the value of human creation, I feel like, you can make a wooden, a machine, a lathe, whatever, can make a perfect bench. And you go, that's good. That's IKEA. It serves its purpose. It's great. And if everyone's buying that perfect bench, awesome. Service, utilitarian, great. But then one person's going to hand make a bench that maybe even looks the same. But if it's handmade, people will pay $1 bajillion for it because I think generally, at least people who can afford it, value that the fact that a human made it, it means more inherently.
Yeah, I live upstate New York, and we're kind of close to some old like shaker properties, and there's lots of kind of the values they had kind of imbued the rest of this area with this idea of stuff that's handmade and it's really carefully made. They're not just throwing stuff together. It's made to be to specific dimensions and whatnot. But it's the human element, the fact that, like you said, someone made this and it's very it's very functional and it's really precisely does what it's supposed to do, that makes it still valuable hundreds of years later, as opposed to just something to like prop up your butt for a couple years.
Yeah. Well, and also I feel like we as a human society value artifacts, and I don't think Kallax shelf is an artifact, but that aforementioned handmade bench is, oh, my grandfather made this and it was been in our family the whole time, versus my grandfather bought this and we didn't throw it away.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great word. I'm totally gonna use that, artifact, because, it's a funny thing. In the 20th century, each decade kind of had its own iconic things, even within cinematography. Think about like the 70s had zoom lenses and lighter camera. The 80s was using, I don't know, like diffusion filters a lot.
HMIs.
Yes. Kinos, and then the early 90s like changed the game. And music and fashion and art all did this thing. And we've kind of, arguably, we're in this era where we're worried about the future of kind of AI, but we've already been about 2 decades in terms of algorithms kind of suggesting things to us, and businesses are making decisions based on algorithms, and they don't necessarily come up with new ideas. These are kind of designed to be autocorrect, to try to like help what they think you want. And, arguably that means we kind of a little bit have less of a definition of what our time is. And I think you're right. I think artifacts in some of these special things that we make hopefully do kind of, that's the flag that we get to set in this point in time.
Yeah, no, that's actually an excellent point. Because that's something I think I've had in the back of my head is not to get too deep on a cinematography podcast, but I think the general part of the general unrest we all seem to be feeling has to do with a lack of identity within a culture, because right now we are exploded in time. We can have everything, the sounds from the 20s are can be perfectly replicated or like remastered, so those artifacts aren't stuck in their ways. They can all be modernized, and now you can have anything. Or in filmmaking, especially with how excellent VFX are now, you can make anything. There's no the now is ephemeral. There's just kind of, it's all now. Now, time is a flat circle, as they say. So yeah, that's an interesting one to think about. Well, that's it. All right. No. Did you actually? I did want to ask, because you worked for him. Was there anything that you kind of learned working on Bradford Young sets that you've carried on with you through your cinematography?
Though I'd be very shy to compare myself to him. I do think just his kind of spirit, I think, more than anything. Obviously, he's kind of well known for really kind of pushing the boundaries in terms of darkness. But I think and that's not necessarily like what I'm known for. But I think just his approach to the work, his spirit, he really does kind of approach it like an artist. And, when I worked as a focus puller, I worked with cinematographers that are very technical. Some are not technical. And of course he knows the technical side like the back of his hand. And it would always like impress you because he kind of so much is the artist that it's like, oh, he actually really knows the engineering of what we were working with. But he was just super creative. I remember there was one day on that movie where we were shooting inside a bar, and his gaffer, Christian Epps, who's been working forever and has an amazing resume, Christian said, as diffusion, let's use a paper bag. And they went and got a paper bag and cut it out so it made a flat.
Like a brown paper bag?
Brown paper bag. And that was like the quality. And I'm sure he'd used that at some point before, but it that was in the tool bag waiting to be pulled out again. And, there was just stuff like that. The way they use practicals. There'd be times where we would have, 2 lights lighting up an entire practical lamps that art department had provided. But that doesn't mean he just turned the light on and started shooting. Like, those things were sculpted, and because they're not movie lights, there's kind of, you have to add stuff and flags and fusion and all this stuff to make them work for what you need them to do. But they still have a unique quality. And just that, he a lot of times when we make stuff, when DPs shoot things, we have all these references, we come up with lookbooks. Maybe that's how we got the job in the first place, a way to communicate with different department heads. But it's oftentimes you start shooting and that stuff kind of gets, put behind you, and you're just worried about what's in front of you. And sometimes you can kind of forget about some of your early references. He just made boards, printed out the boards of books, of still photos, frames from movies, and just would have that on set. Sometimes he'd play music on set. He just created a really nice environment that, yes, we're craftspeople and we got to like make this thing and we have budgets and schedules, but it's also, he kind of made the experience as nice as possible too, which is great. And it's something that I try to bring, being that I worked as a crew member for so many years. I like to think that I'm aware when I'm asking for something that's a little bit of a technical challenge, or something, if I need to like change a light or something I'm aware that it's difficult, and maybe I can kind of help keep the mood good when we have to do something pretty hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that is what by comparison, what are some things that you've seen on a set maybe where the department heads were not helping you out? Things that taught you to, things that you immediately went, I'm going to avoid that when I'm in charge.
I'll put this in the nicest possible way.
Sure.
When shooting on a bigger project, a lot of times I'm not operating, which is a little bit of a funny thing. I love operating. I think the movies I've done where I'm in there on set.
Best job on set?
It is. And it's also the hardest job on set in many ways. The responsibility of doing that and planning the lighting setup for tomorrow, or talking, we lost a location for next week, so here's some options. There's lots of stuff that you need to be doing to kind of stay ahead. And not operating is, on a project like Mrs. Davis, that scale, it's really not an option to operate yourself. And I think I think it can be difficult when you're doing all those other things. Your head's in tomorrow and next week and next month and in post, and you have to make sure you're still a presence on set. It's very tempting to just go live in the DIT booth. You're tired. It's hot. You've been talking. Your voice is a little raspy. It's kind of nice. It's easy to just sit down there. A lot of times it's air conditioned in those little tents. And I think that's bad. I think it's good to have your kind of will and your spirit, your energy on set. I think the actors like it. I think just a continuity like that is really good. So that's one thing that I certainly try to do, is make sure people can see my face. A lot of times I'll try to be on set. Even if I'm not operating, I'll be there kind of like, I remember seeing like Tarantino, the way he directs is like he stands next to the camera and looks at the onboard monitor. I kind of enjoy doing that as a DP. There's other times where I have to have a bigger monitor and I need to be a little bit farther away, but that's some advice that I think is a good move.
Yeah. Are you a naturally sort of organized person? Like, does that sort of having your brain in tomorrow and next week come naturally, or did you have to kind of learn those skills?
It's a little of both. When I was a focus puller, Jody Lipes, the DP that I worked with most often, I definitely know he was annoyed that I didn't take enough kind of like notes on the distance. You're supposed to measure everything and write down everything and keep it all. That was not necessarily my strength. I think as like a cinematographer though, I do find it it's easy to like start thinking about that stuff just because you kind of get an idea of the repercussions. If you're not prepared, you're not going to have a light in the right place, or the thing's going to be too dark, or there's going to be problems that ultimately no one else is going to like reprimand you for, but you're going to feel like your work is not as good as it could have been.
Right.
And I think that's really, as I've grown, that's the biggest thing that I've learned in the last couple of years is like, not that many people are going to call you out on B minus lighting, for example. But it's, it's bad, and you feel like you could have made the scene just feel just a little bit more connected to this emotion or to this thing, that piece of, information that needs to be told in the story. So you're just hurting yourself in that regard. And it's, at the end of the day, it's kind of your work. And so it's just like, that's not to say it's all about me and it's all about the cinematography. I really think the movie is the most important part. The TV show is the most important part. It's not all on one department head. It's not all on one, department. It's kind of this amazing collective that is movie making. But yeah, I think that's something, a nice little lesson I've learned is like, I got to do it for myself to make sure it's like good for me. And if my values are kind of coordinated correctly with the project, that'll be what the best way to do it is.
Well, and I'll even go one step further and add that something that I've learned is not only will you not get called out for B minus lighting or whatever, but even if you do worse, unless it's catastrophic, most people won't call you out on set. They just won't call you back.
Right.
They just silently will not call you, and you will have no idea why.
And that's another issue kind of with movie making in general too. It's like, you want there to be a meritocracy. You want to like, okay, I did a good job on this project. I'm going to be rewarded with a bigger project or a bigger opportunity.
I'm Rob Richardson forever. Yeah.
And I think if a project doesn't work out, nowadays, it's just kind of it's quiet. It's lonely. You don't kind of get the kind of boost that you were hoping for. Not that many people connect with it. And that's, kind of that's a newer type of, in some ways that's harder than just people kind of throwing tomatoes at you and giving you thumbs down.
Well, I mean, I've always been the type of person who prefers the tomatoes because at least that's feedback.
Exactly. Yeah. I love a director who can like have opinions and tell me and push me, and it's hard when it's the opposite, because then it's just you. It's just my ideas. And really my best work is when I do something, the director that has an idea, and we make them work to form a third idea that's even better, as opposed to just me making stuff look nice.
Yeah.
I don't care so much about nice. I want interesting.
Yeah. The other thing that's my problem is I tend to have a pretty, I've been told, a pretty strong personality. And so I think if I had to psychoanalyze myself, it's because I want that aggressive kind of feedback. Not that I'm aggressive necessarily, but I will, be blunt a lot of times. And I think it's because I want people to be blunt with me. You put out into the world what you want to see back, or at least what you think you deserve and stuff. And I think a lot of people get thrown off by that. So that has been something I've had to learn, is like, couch everything, quietly think about it before saying something.
Right. And as a department head, you have power, and you have, particularly as a cinematographer, you're one of the people on set talking the most. Yeah. And I find that I'm a little more careful with the words I use nowadays.
Totally. With all that kind of springing us into the second half of the conversation, how did Mrs. Davis come across your table?
I think Miss Davis came into my life kind of in a amazingly, I think it's one shot that I did in a movie is that got the door open for me.
That's why you do your best.
Yeah, every shot.
Every time. Yeah.
I was shooting a movie a couple years ago called The Old Man and the Gun. It's a very special movie, Robert Redford's last movie in front of the camera. And I'd grown up in Utah, and Sundance had kind of always been going on every January, and kind of always looked up to Sundance, always kind of felt like all the cool kids come to town for 2 weeks and then they leave. I wanted to be, maybe not a cool kid, but I wanted to be up there in the middle of it all. So cut to X amount of years later, I'm shooting Robert Redford's final movie. It was pretty cool. And we did a shot one day where we were driving in a car and Redford's behind the wheel. David Lowery is in the passenger seat and I'm in the back with a Arri 416 shot on 16 millimeter for that. And that was all we had. And it was just, again, I have a camera department background. I know how to kind of work a camera on my own. So we didn't need a whole crew of people stuffed in there. And we just went for a ride and got some wide shots, got some profile shots. And at one point, the director, David, asked me to zoom in on Robert's earpiece. Because in the story, he has an earpiece that's the police radio. So he's one step ahead of the police. And David liked that moment where I zoomed in, grabbed focus, zoomed out a little bit, which is kind of a common way to kind of, when you're shooting off style, to grab focus. And David loved that kind of little imperfections to that shot. And that shot's in the movie, it's in the trailer. And so cut to 2022, the director of Mrs. Davis, Owen Harris, he is just arrived in Hollywood. He's from England. And he kind of was looking for a DP that didn't have tons of kind of TV experience. He wanted someone that had a little bit of movies, a little bit of TV. And because this project is truly all over the place, he wanted one with, had done a lot of stuff, a lot of different things. And he reached out to me through my agents. My agents, said, hey, this really interesting project with some interesting names behind the script. I want to talk to you. And we sent me the script. And I'm usually kind of, because working on a long movie or a TV series is a huge time commitment, I'm usually a little cool. I got to keep it at a distance. I'm not sure. I don't want to fall in love too quickly. But I put the script down and I was just like, what is this? This is maybe, in my opinion, the best pilot I've ever read, the best, this could be incredible. So I prepared a lot. I wrote down all these questions. The first episode is just full of so many things, so many strands. I had a page worth of questions and notes. And I had an interview with the director over Zoom. This was still slightly COVID pandemic times. Right. And we just kind of hit it off. And it was just, we exchanged kind of ideas. And I think a lot of times when a department head, cinematographer is being interviewed, directors and the producers are just trying to find, is this person, do they like the project? Are they interested in doing it? Are they reliable? Are they going to kind of go off the handle? Are they going to, be really expensive? Do they basically have the values? Do they understand what show this is? And I think Owen and I just really kind of hit it off. And the interview process was pretty easy. I talked to him a couple times. I talked to the producers. I'm sure they did background checks and all this stuff on me and offered me the job, and flew to LA as soon as I could. And that's that.
That's a fun, I love it. I love the idea. It would be funny if it was literally just the earpiece photo. We got earpiece in our TV show. He shot an earpiece once.
Exactly. I think it might be as simple as that. Mrs. Davis does have some very complex connections in the show itself. It also has some really dumb connections. And I think that maybe that was the thing that kind of got my foot in the door. And the rest is history.
Yeah, it is a very, I think Peacock needs to put out some different marketing materials, because everyone I've spoken to about the film or the show, they're like, the nun one, and I'm like, it's like a sci-fi comedy, and they're like, wait, there's a nun. I'm like, yeah, she's the main character, it's fine. I think, because it is a wild, I think it actually is, I should be a little more kind to them. It is a hard show to market, I assume, because it is very all over the place in an amazing way.
It is. And the funny thing is, and this is something I've learned, is kind of getting more experience in the business, is everyone is pitching the project. when director has it, they have to pitch it to prospective crew members. I had to do that when I'm interviewing gaffers and key grips. I'm having to kind of pitch the project. And I can tell you, yes, it's very, very hard. I think one of the struggles Peacock has in marketing it too is it's such a cool, complete package that you don't want to give away. I think they were quite hesitant to.
Yeah.
So the first trailer really is picked from a couple things that don't really give anything away, which is kind of limiting because the whole series is a big complicated web, and then it comes together and lines up like really nicely. But maybe now that it's been out for a while, maybe some more marketing can come out that's a little less risk averse to spoilers.
Yeah. I will say for anyone listening to this pod, well, I guess we don't really have to get into spoiler territory to talk about certain scenes, but yeah, that's the other thing too, is like Netflix falls into this problem where they'll like have a show that's interesting and then they can't market it because it is interesting like that, and then they cancel it because no one watched it. It's like, just let them finish it and then let people find it. That's why DVDs worked, like shows like, I don't know why this came to mind first, but like Mallrats or even Fight Club, like didn't hit until it was on DVD, and then it found its audience, and then, it's one of the most popular films of all time now. Like, you can't keep just taking down stuff that doesn't work immediately. Like, how expensive is hard drive space?
Right. Even famously, Seinfeld the first season was kind of hit or miss, and it's not, NBC really had to kind of believe in the project and kind of, give it a little more time, not just one season to kind of blossom. And obviously they were, I think, happy they did.
Yeah. The show.
Let's not avoid spoilers. I think, maybe we can give some heads up if we're going to spoil something, but let's not avoid it. Let's get it out there. I think the more the merrier.
Sure. I did kind of starting generally. A lot of the show is outdoors. And I was wondering how you were approaching a lot of these outdoors scenes, because there's some scenes that take place in the past, there's some scenes that take place in the present, a lot of different, desert, England, so to speak. I don't know, was that actually, it doesn't matter. So what's your general approach to outside lighting? Because I find it can be more difficult than indoors.
One of the most exciting parts of the show is that it is a road movie. It is like a road show. And there's only one set that we keep going back to in every episode. And it evolves as the story changes. But it was largely, on the move. And that's tricky. It's tricky when you have, I think some days we had maybe as many as 250, 300 crew members doing stuff with cast. We certainly had some scenes with, 500 extras. It makes it hard when you're not just kind of doing that in a simple controlled environment. One of the kind of aspects, particularly the first episode, is this kind of Looney Tunes style chase. Yeah. And when you think about Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, there's like in these deserts with roads and long vistas. And, we kind of had to find that based somewhat near, where we were based out of in Warner Brothers stages. And we found these amazing spots, but they're, 2 hours away. They're out in the desert. It's very expensive to kind of travel there. Crew had to be put up. And so you can't just sit around and wait for like magic hour to shoot the perfect light. Obviously we did that with certain scenes. We focused on, getting the right time of day when we want to get this shot. But lighting and kind of working around and with the sun and against the sun was fortunately a big value that Owen, the director, had. And he was a big help in terms of not only kind of supporting me, but also kind of driving that, like, let's not shoot in the middle of the day, for example, any exteriors. That we would even went to the lengths of, we built a set. There's a little set where the chapel where the nuns pray. It's kind of triangle shaped room. And we had that built not on stage, but kind of 2 hours out of the city, in a place at this where hay is stored, at a working farm. And that allowed us to avoid having to be shooting dialogue scenes in the middle of the day. Obviously, you can always just float overhead diffusion to kind of make the sun less awful, but
Right.
it still kind of looks artificial. I usually try to avoid trying to softening the sun too much because it looks a little unreal. And
What's that stuff? Highlight? That's usually pretty good.
highlights one, yeah, I try to use it as light as possible if I ever have to. But we really, really focused the schedule on the sun. So if we had a scene that was several pages and say we had 6 hours to do it, we would start facing east. So the sun's up, everyone's backlit. Maybe when we middle of the day, that's when you do the wide shots. Pull back, you're not having to like really make sure anyone's too, perfectly lit. So try to see the environment mostly maybe in the middle of the day, and then when you're looking on the other side of the line, do that stuff later in the day when the sun is going down in the west. So that was one of the big things, and one of the big pieces of advice I have from learning from this show is just do whatever you can to get, if there's anything you can shoot in the middle of the day, doesn't have to be right there. Can you rework something? Can you put something in a different setting so you can just pop over and shoot something not at noon? That makes a big difference. And being an East Coast DP, certainly the sun was a learning experience for me. We're used to buildings that work is like amazing, like flags and solids and stuff.
Reflectors sometimes.
Negative fill, positive fill. This time it was, you're just out there in the middle of nowhere. And, aside from some sunscreen, try to get indoors or do anything you can to put something underneath, or maybe stage the scenes under cover or something if you need to shoot all day long outdoors.
Yeah, it does. I was wondering, the show does have a pretty unified look to it, especially for being, like I said, there's time travel, there's all kinds of shit. But I was wondering if there was kind of a general lookbook that you guys had, or if there was like a reference that you guys were pulling from, or if you kind of were just going off of the way you like to light things and shoot things, so to speak.
The tone of Mrs. Davis was like so tricky because there is this kind of like comedy, goofy element to it. But
Betty Gilpin deadpans very well.
Betty Gilpin is our generation's Buster Keaton. She's amazing. She can be both, her physical comedy is incredible. Also her deadpan, where the audience kind of just, we intuit onto her what we think she's thinking. She's really incredible. And I would certainly love to work many, many more times with her.
Sure.
But
sorry, lookbook.
Yeah, lookbook. One of the cool things about being like the DP that kind of shoots the pilot, I shot for the episodes, so I did get to create the look for the project, and because it's got these comedy things, but it's also a drama, and it's also about these kind of amazingly timely, prescient ideas. It was a little bit of a tightrope walk to kind of get everything in there and have it all balance. So we did that by creating reference images and lookbooks and putting them together and talking and showing Tara, showing Damon, showing the director. It's really easy these days compared to when I was just starting out. We have things like shot deck.
Love a shot deck.
Frame grab. When my stuff gets up on those platforms, it's a proud day.
Sure.
And those really make it easy to kind of like very quickly, you have an idea, find that image, let's find another image, let's find maybe something I hadn't thought of. You can kind of go down a wormhole and find something different than where you had initially started. And we basically just found a bunch of reference stuff, Wild at Heart was certainly one. We did like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, kind of has a big on this. Sound of Music. The first episode has this incredible like 2-minute montage where we're just seeing the nuns at the convent, which I just don't know that you see on TV very often. And yeah, Sound of Music made a big impact on that. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, helped us out a bit. And I think a big one in terms of kind of the LUT was Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. That's incredibly made that's like an anamorphic movie that has both like really kind of formal compositions and also like tons of personality. The camera's whizzing all over the place. I think, nowadays Baz is shooting digitally and kind of doing stuff dialed up to 11. I think that movie was dialed up to 10. And I think it's like the right spots for me in terms of like really dynamic cinematography that really tells the story, but also makes all these things like larger than life. And that kind of felt like a decent fit for this show we were doing. So I had to put lookbooks together. I had to kind of make a pitch book to convince Tara and Damon to shoot widescreen. And once they were signed off on widescreen, then we moved that up to Peacock and Warner Brothers, and they gave that a thumbs up. So that a lot of times does become the responsibility of the DP doing the pilot. And it's extra responsibility, but you also really get to know the project inside and out, to define things. And if you do a good job on that, you then get to share all that with the other DPs in the series. So whenever someone would come on, I know you had Xavier on your show, who's become a great friend.
That's great.
You show them your dailies. If there's an edit available, they get to see the edit, show them all the lookbooks, and then you just kind of talk about some of the challenges. And again, I keep using the word values, just like what is important to this project. And with this show, it was really important, kind of what we were talking about earlier, just not trying to engineer perfection, have some personal expression in there, let it feel kind of as unexpected as the writing is. And that's really what the show needs.
Yeah. What were some of the things, in those discussions? I think it's probably easier to say like, here's what we're not doing. This is what the show isn't. What were some of those things that you were like, we're not, a lot of times it's easy, like we're not going Steadicam, but like for you guys, what was it?
I try not to go too much into what we're not doing. Maybe someone who's very powerful, who's can take a punch. David Fincher, like his stuff is exquisite and it's, incredibly immaculately made, but we were like, let's not do that. Let's let our dolly have a little bit of like personality in there. Like it's okay. Lighting wise and LUT wise, I definitely try to kind of, with the LUT, try to have it feel a little bit like film. I think a lot of the movies I referenced are kind of even 90s era movies. And I think that's just the way film stocks were back then and the way the video transfers were. I just think that's kind of baked into me. Did you have I noticed the skin tones in the show are more what I like. And I was like, but they're not like super saturated, and they kind of have a very, I'm sure everyone just had like nice makeup and shit, but there was like a smooth look to everything. Was that engineered in a specific way, or was that just a result of the kind of overall LUT that you were building? I think as a result, nothing that we kind of explicitly wrote down that we wanted to create. I think a lot of times, nowadays shooting digitally, you're kind of rewarded for shooting dark. And it's very much a good format for shooting dark, low contrast. So you can have, and particularly in drama, which is very forgiving, you can have a dark room and have just a little bit of light hitting the actor and it looks really great. But this kind of project, it's got so much mystery in it that it didn't feel like the right approach was then to like have visual mystery in every shot and hide things. Like, we want to see the creativity that has gone into the writing and the production design and the costumes and the VFX and the special effects. And it just felt like having stuff, I kept using this word, which is maybe a little unfair, but I think it's kind of generous to have things just a little more visible. And I just think the audience kind of enjoys the adventure of kind of getting to like see this, the amazing stuff that was happening in front of the camera. So, I think that just kind of lent itself to a certain kind of level of lighting. And I think it just helped make things exciting. We weren't trying to kind of be mysterious and navel gazy. The show's a wild mystery, and we're kind of just hanging on ourselves as the filmmakers.
Yeah. It's not, I would never say it's an overexposed show, but there's a lot of lift to it, and the highlights are managed, but still like very present, upper range of the vector scope, I guess, or waveform.
We also have we're in this funny moment where we're making things for HDR and SDR, and every network kind of has its own workflow, and I've had some work better than others. I like the SDR version of Mrs. Davis a lot better. If anyone is not sure which to watch, that's my recommendation. But yeah, we had a great fun, and we wanted the show to look fun, and I think that was our approach.
Yeah, you had mentioned the widescreenness of it. Because it is a very anamorphic show, sometimes more obviously than others, but certainly gives the image a lot of character. What lenses were you shooting on, and how did you come to that decision?
We shot with lenses that are a little bit less well known. I think they're going to take off because they're incredible. But lenses we used were called Caldwell Chameleons. And it's a fascinating interview with those people. Really?
Oh, well, no, Gecko. My bad. Never mind.
There's a lot of different people kind of entering the anamorphic space. So it's a good time, I think. Nice to have yeah, exactly. And we looked at Atlas lenses as well. I didn't come to it thinking I have to do this. I'm usually not that kind of DP. I like every project, we need to kind of like get in there and see what's floating around in the ether, and let's just start testing things and see what feels right. Obviously, there's technical requirements like how fast the lenses are, how sharp they are, how not sharp they are. But I kind of came on to these chameleons after just testing several things. And it turns out the director, Owen, he's a friend with one of the guys that helped develop them. Nick Sadler is a guy who himself is a DP. He worked with Chemical Wedding to make the Artemis Director's Viewfinder app.
Oh, sure. Yep.
And he also, guy's amazing. He also helped engineer these lenses. And they do something really special. I'm not trying to be an advertisement for them, but there was a quality of just the kind of old C-series Panavision anamorphic lenses that are kind of hailed as the greatest lenses ever made for movies. And what these lenses are kind of nice as, they don't have a 2x squeeze that most anamorphic lenses do. It's a 1.79 squeeze. Mm-hmm. So shooting digitally, you're actually getting to record more pixels. And though it might sound like, well, aren't you losing something by not having this 2x squeeze? But in reality, you're getting the same shape. The ovals of the out of focus background are always dependent on just how out of focus an image is. So I could not tell that these were not the classic 2x squeeze. But I think what was special about them is the quality of the blur in the background.
Yeah.
Funky stuff on the top and bottom that really just kind of like had the right look for the show. I can't describe it any better. It makes the story a little bit larger than life. It's not kind of photo realism. There's, lens distortion, which is kind of goes in line with this idea of not wanting, the work to be perfectly engineered and seem like it's made by a machine. But we did a kind of an interesting thing with them. Those lenses are they're made for Super 35, and you can have a conversion to a little bit of a diopter inside to make them give a larger image circle to work with larger format, which all the streamers kind of have 4K requirements now. And at that time, Arri only had the LF that had a 4K sensor. But I kind of did the opposite with them. I used the Super 35 version called the SC, standard coverage. I used that on the large format Alexa.
Yeah.
And we're still able to just fall in line because of the 1.79 squeeze. We just hit that 4K requirement. But it meant we got a little bit extra of that like funky stuff on the top and bottom, which I just think kind of helps. You're just always a little bit subconsciously aware that you're looking at an image. You're not 100% lost in the show. You're not 100% dreaming it, but you're just 1%. You're aware that you're watching something that was crafted. And in a show that's a little bit about kind of voyeurism and never being able to get away from technology, that idea just kind of made sense to me. And so we happily went with those lenses, and they were great, and they're fast, and there's lots of different focal lengths. So that's good. And they could give us 2 sets, which is also important when you're shooting a big show and you got to do all this stuff. And so we worked with Keslow there in LA, and that was our camera package.
Yeah, it's actually funny you mentioned all that, because I did the spec commercial last year, and I'm friends with the Atlas guys, hence the T-shirt. But they gave me their Silver Series anamorphics, and I had that C500 I was talking about, but I forgot to ask for the large format expander, so I was just chucking the lenses on there to see if they would cover. And they all, except for like one of them, even like the 21 millimeter, basically covered, which was wild. That thing is real, very anamorphic. But it's like sometimes it's fun to go a little off label like that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, going back to Bradford Young and Jody Lipes, these other cinematographers that I worked with, they were always kind of looking for ways to break the rules. The first job I ever did with Jody, it was Super 16, but he was shooting reversal film and then cross-processing that and shooting anamorphic. So it's just like every kind of, anything you can do to kind of like throw a challenge at yourself, he did on that project. Bradford, when we were doing Ain't That Body Saints, I think we were underexposing for our day exteriors 3 stops. Jesus. So, and not pushing in the processing of the film. So super thin negative that had to be brought up in the grade, and the image kind of like it almost falls apart. But you're like, it's incredible the look that he was able to get with, with 250D stock underexposed 2 stop or 3 stops. So I think it's always good to it can be nice to give yourself just a little bit of a technical hurdle, which does really give each project a real kind of signature. That's a nice shorthand of creating some memorable stuff, I think.
Yeah, well, and also limitations always make you make creative decisions. If you're given the world, you end up making something not horrifically interesting.
Totally. One of the most favorite things I've shot in the last 5 years, it was just me and I think a C300, and me and the director just were doing a doc style commercial, very low budget, and I had, I think, a Canon 70-200 lens, and I'm moving it myself, doing everything myself, but it's like I was just able to kind of, because I had that limitation, that was just me doing it, it was really something that was quite special to me in terms of how kind of off the wall, like there was no rules, so I could kind of do what I wanted, but I had some severe limitations at the same time. So yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah. I guess for the first like 5 years of my freelancing career, I had one camera and basically one zoom. So I unintentionally developed a look, so it would be easier to hire. So I think when you draw those lines around your technical limitations, you're allowed to do anything creatively, because if the gear won't break on you. Basically, do whatever you want. I did want to ask before we kind of let you go. Was there anything in this show that you were particularly proud of in turn? Obviously, the show as a whole, but like any particular scene or setup that maybe was challenging that you were able to overcome, or you just think, maybe simply just looked very pretty and you're very, very happy with it, or anything like that?
I mean, I could probably talk for 2 hours on the stuff that I'm most proud of. There was a funny situation we had where in the end of episode 2, there was kind of written this scene that kind of has a bit of a visual kind of a real kind of exclamation point, which is also really great to get to work on a project where so many of these amazing ideas are visual. The scene kind of dovetails several different kind of elements the show's dealing with, where Simone, the main character, has kind of come across this old man who's looking for a piano that his wife used to play. It's got a little nostalgia, and he's trying to find it. And she says, "I'll pray for it." Effectively saying, I'll use my faith to try to help find this piano. She forgets about it, and instead, this algorithm, who's trying to kind of, kind of push Simone into doing what she wants, goes over behind her back and gets all the pianos in the world effectively, and
That's a great shot.
Gets them for this man. And so we knew we had to bring it. We had to really kind of execute this shot at the right time of day. And of course we've scouted it. It's lots of great tools for finding when the sun's going to be perfectly right there. And we're feeling good about it. And about 5 days before we're set to shoot that scene, the location manager comes to us. And he's usually kind of a easygoing guy, and he's got a very serious look on his face. It's like, we think we lost that location. Christopher Nolan is going to blow that location up for his movie.
For Oppenheimer.
They're going to nuke your set. So unfortunately, we can't shoot there. So we said, it's annoying. What are we going to do? I think he's going to win this fight.
He's got a nuke.
Yes, exactly. And we're pacifists. And so we had to go rescout. And we loved that location. But what it kind of forced us to do is we went back, we walked around. The obvious place was no longer available for us. So now we had this kind of limitation. We started going around. We kind of, there's probably 6 of us who all went in our different directions. And Owen, the director, he just happened to walk up a hill. He said, "Joe, come take a look at this." We walked up the hill, and suddenly now you had an elevation and you had a perspective that you didn't have had you just kind of gone to kind of the most comfortable place, the most convenient place. And the scene just has this amazing thing where this car pulls up, Simone gets out, and the camera just pans over, and you just unveiled is, hundreds of pianos. And I'll say too, to credit Emma Fairley, the production designer, and her team, I think they got about 40 actual pianos out there.
That was going to be my next question, because I saw that scene and I was like, all right, I was immediately, this is how stupid I am. I saw the first 10 up front, and I was trying to see the line where VFX started, and it must have been way further back, because I assumed it was 8 pianos that were real.
No, exactly. And they did such a good job. I almost was saying, do we need VFX? We have 40. That's amazing.
It's a lot of pianos.
The other problem of they had to get the pianos set there without trampling all this tall grasses. So they were amazing on that. That was, just a incredible kind of challenge. I think what else was there?
I assume trying to coordinate all the stunt work must have been a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's when I read the script, I was just kind of it's scary, but it's good to kind of go into a project where you don't 100% know how you're going to pull it off. And I think luckily everyone was kind of in the same boat on this. And the first episode has, I think, what was described as, I think it was called the batshit crazy chase. And that's what we called it on all the storyboards. And I think
The donut chase?
call sheet. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that project, I mean, the chase had to take place at all these specific plot points, but we had to find locations that would permit us to actually like do these crazy things on their roads. We weren't allowed to shoot the places we love. We couldn't shoot on the weekday, so we had to come in on a weekend. We shot that, I think it was our first full day of the shoot, so everyone's very nervous. We had 3 cameras.
The first day?
The first day. We did a little mini day with Simone in her cell. I call it the reverse striptease. She's like getting dressed into her nun's habit. That was just kind of a nice kind of like warm-up day we all had. And then Saturday, we're like going in at guns blazing. And the scene kind of culminates in this amazing idea that wasn't even in the screenplay. I think it was Owen, the director's idea, was that they at one point jump through an enormous donut, which of course they do. Of course, that's what they should do. That makes sense for this. And the safety involved was very important. Doing a motorcycle jump with 2 people on a motorcycle is a whole different ballgame for one person.
Yeah.
So we just did lots of testing, lots of training. We rolled 5 cameras on it. We had an enormous camera crew that day. And then a little bit of help from VFX to kind of really make it perfect. And yeah, there you go. Beautiful, hopefully kind of iconic shot.
Yeah. Honestly, the shot that I think is pretty iconic, and I think you shared it on your Instagram, is during the fight where the nun stabs a guy through the head with a knife that's in her stomach.
That's, I think, one of the testaments to this project and just to kind of a good project in general is Tara and Damon made this incredible kind of engine that it just worked, and you could feed stuff into this engine and like you could come up with great ideas. And they had scripted it. I think it literally says Kill Bill fight scene takes place, but they didn't have, in the scripts level, they didn't have every little thing figured out.
Right.
And I think it was our Spanish stunt coordinator or fight choreographer who came up with that idea, where the American stunt coordinator had kind of designed this fight, and then we took it to Spain and had a Spanish fight coordinator, and I think it was his idea to do that. And it's just incredible that like on a project that's so big, so many moving parts, that still people that are just in for one special thing still kind of have the opportunity to add to the project. And that's one of the favorite details in the entire show. And I've seen so many people's reactions in social media of just going like realizing when that happens that they're in for a treat with this particular show.
It reminds me, did you ever watch The Raid?
I didn't know.
So The Raid, it's by, he's done well for himself now, but at the time it was his first film. Not Gareth Edwards. Is it Gareth? Anyway, it's an Indonesian film shot on an AF-100 of all things, which made me go, oh, I guess I need an AF-100. So I bought that when it came out. But there's a scene where there's a hallway fight, and it's this guy grabs another guy and jumps backwards through a broken door and basically chops his head off with like the bottom of the door frame that's all spiky. And that's like the same thing where it's like, oh my God, like, and you go, this is gonna be the best movie ever.
No, it's lovely when you kind of have these little moments that get you. And yeah, those can be so hard to find. That's one of the other issues that happens when you try to over-engineer a project. You lose out on the happy accidents. Yeah. You lose out on someone having a fairly spontaneous idea. And yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. I want to be, mindful of your time because it's probably later for you than it is for me. But I do end probably you're in New York. That's how time works.
I don't know if you've noticed the light levels dropped. I've been dialing down the light in between questions to try to balance out the levels.
It's raining here too. For like the past 2 weeks, it's been gross. But and I just let it. I let my light get shitty, and I feel like my camera's starting to die on. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I didn't record. Well, I guess I don't have a camera angle for me. It's just gonna be you in the video. That's fine.
I was going to warn you about that. Because I remember that happened in Xavier's episode.
Yep.
I was going to make sure you're recording.
That's fucking hilarious that it's going to be both Miss Davis's where I don't have oh well, it doesn't matter. That's little tip for everyone. Backups are important because the nice thing is Zoom records everything. I pinned you so it only keeps you, but all the audio like stems are kept separate. Everything is like, so we didn't lose anything except my face, but no one's here for my face anyway. Yeah. Yeah. That is funny though, that it's the two of you. Anyway, the way that we tend to end the podcast with the same two questions, which you may have heard. First one, you kind of answered one of them earlier, but first one, if you were to put Mrs. Davis in a double feature, which I know is hard for television, but imagine it's one film, what would the other film be?
Oh, that's amazing. No, I was, hopefully I answered the other one. What would I do with this? I think I would choose, and just because this was kind of a reference for us, but not a literal one, what is Mulholland Drive? I think there's another podcast called Blank Check, which is kind of about, they kind of go deep dives on directors who have gotten very famous and done big projects. And they go through all their little projects as they grow. And someday they get their blank check project where they can kind of do whatever they want.
That's cool.
And one of the podcasters kind of has this nice saying where he said, all interesting movies are puzzles or dreams. And I think that's amazing, but I don't necessarily think it's an either or. I think there's kind of like a spectrum. And I just think about that quite a bit where, what makes Mrs. Davis special is not the fact that it's kind of a mystery and a puzzle you're trying to get together. It's also not just a complete surreal, visual kind of experience. It kind of is balancing both of these things very well. And I think kind of the best example of that ever is Mulholland Drive, which now that I've worked in movies, I've kind of learned, I understand a little bit how that movie ended up being the way it is, because they shot it as a TV show, and then basically when the pilot wasn't picked up, they shot 30 more minutes that kind of it just kind of destroys everything that happened in the hour ahead of it. And that's just been, to me, kind of one of those kind of touchstones of great art that is both a dream and a puzzle at the same time. So I would say maybe consider watching those two as a doubleheader.
That's a good one. Yeah, because I guess Blue Velvet would be a little too gross. Not a good. Oh, it's a great film, but it would be a hard pivot from. Maybe that would be a good contrast to Miss Davis. Second question, which you kind of already answered, but and I feel like this maybe doesn't fit your personality as I've gotten to know you, but a lot of people will ask, like, oh, what's the best piece of advice you ever got? But I feel like it's always like, oh, stick with it, So what's the worst piece of advice you ever got?
Oh boy. What's the worst piece of advice? It's not entirely movie related.
That's fine.
I was told before I moved to New York, never go out anywhere after dark. Don't ever carry more than $20 on you, because you're going to get mugged and it's going to be terrible. And that was terrible advice. I think it's great to go out and be adventurous in the world. And then one day I was actually mugged in New York when I was in film school, and I had dailies in my pocket, as a matter of fact, from a student film that I had shot, and the muggers took the dailies. fortunately, the director had a backup copy as well. These were, this is talking mini DV days.
Right. But also backups.
So I think, though it actually might have helped in one case, I think the worst advice I ever got was never go outside at night in New York City.
Yeah. Well, and I think to expand on that, like it's especially these days with the internet, this will be an interesting wrap up. It's a lot easier to be fearful because, if one person gets mugged in New York back in the day, you'd see one news article about it in New York. Now you'll see 1,000 articles about it everywhere. So in your head, 1,000 people have been mugged, and it could be near you because your local station picked it up or whatever. But statistically, it is the safest time to exist that it's ever been.
Yeah, and I think that's, segue, bring it full circle. I think that's one of, I think that's true. I think we need to kind of need to keep the images that we see in media. We have to kind of be skeptical of them. And we have to hold on to what our humanity is, our kind of random bumping into people on the street. We have to kind of keep doing that stuff. And being a part of a project like Mrs. Davis certainly kind of, has those values, that adventure, that sense of kind of, let's get out there and see what we can do.
Yeah, totally. Well, I feel like we probably could talk for another 2 hours. So open invitation to come back whenever you'd like, whether or not you have a new project. But yeah, thanks for hanging out, man.
Yeah, I'll absolutely take you up on that. My pleasure.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. As this is an independently funded podcast, we rely on support from listeners like you. So if you'd like to help, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/frameandrefpod. We really appreciate your support, and as always, thanks for listening.